Hello, Dan here from Genetec's technical training team. And in this lesson, I'm going to be talking about the software installation for Security Center. I'll begin by showing you where you can download the software itself, as well as any associated documentation. Then we'll take a look at the minimum requirements necessary to install and run Security Center. I'll install a server, and I'll explain each of the dialog boxes that we encounter during the installation. We'll conclude by licensing the server and testing to make sure that the client workstation can successfully connect and log in. So let's begin. If I need to download the installation files to install Security Center for the latest version or any other version, that can be done from portal.genetec.com. Now I've got the full URL here on the slide, but if you just remember portal.genetec.com, you'll be able to browse the site and find it. Once we're at the product download page, we need to set the product to Security Center and the version. Once the page refreshes, you'll find the full 3.8 gigabyte installer package here and the much smaller 21 megabyte web installer here. Both can be used to install Security Center server and/or workstation. The only difference is that the web installer requires an internet connection. Once you've selected all the installation options in the Install Shield wizard, it will download only the necessary components to be installed. Whereas the full 3.8 gigabyte installer package has everything bundled within it, whether you need it or not. Note, there is no distinction between server installation package and client installation package. It's all in the same installation package. Also available for download from the Genetec portal are these two documents that are relevant to the installation of the software: the Security Center System Requirements Guide and the Installation and Upgrade Guide. The System Requirements Guide details everything we need to know regarding the operating system and the hardware requirements for a supported installation of Security Center. Things like which versions of Windows are supported, how much RAM is required, what kind of processor is required, things like that. And the Installation and Upgrade Guide walks us through every step of the installation process. It's divided into two main sections. First, if we're installing Security Center for the first time, and the second section covers upgrading Security Center from a previous version. So let's look at some of the software requirements as described in the System Requirements Guide. I'm not going to read all these details to you. This is straight from the Requirements Guide. It lists the operating systems supported, the database engines supported, and supported browsers for the server admin application. In the Requirements Guide, we can also find other software requirements for various specialized purposes. Let's look at the specific steps to install the client software on a workstation. First of all, be aware that apart from the software requirements, there are also hardware requirements to be respected for a supported configuration. We published 3 sets of hardware requirements: minimum, recommended, and high performance. To install the client software, use a file browser to navigate to the location of the installation files and run the file setup.exe as a Windows administrator. If the Security Desk client application has been installed, the first time it is run, you will see a prompt in the notification tray to run the Video Benchmark Test tool. Clicking the notification will open the benchmark tool. Running the Video Benchmark tool is not a requirement for the Security Desk application to be used, but it's to evaluate your workstation's video card. Running the Benchmark Test tool will allow the Security Desk application to offload the video decoding work from your workstation's CPU to its GPU, or its video card. The test should be run with all other applications closed. In this example, we can see that the benchmark test determined that my workstation's NVIDIA GeForce GTX 750 Ti card can decode up to a total of 502 frames per second of H.264 video. Let's look at server installations. Like workstations, we can find server hardware requirements also documented in the same System Requirements Guide. A few additional considerations to keep in mind when installing a Genetec server. Systems with more than 300 cameras or more must isolate the directory on a dedicated server. So 300 is the threshold at which point we must design a multi-server system. Server-based motion detection can reduce the maximum capacity by as much as 50%. To conserve server resources, we encourage you to run camera-based motion detection whenever possible. Digital signatures can reduce the maximum capacity by as much as 25%. Digital signatures are like CRC checksums used to guarantee the authenticity of a video frame. A more powerful server than the high-end specification will not necessarily increase the maximum capacity. In other words, don't assume that if you build a server with double the hardware specs, that you can manage double the number of cameras and doors. A virtual machine with the same specifications as its physical counterpart has about 20% less capacity than its physical counterpart. If we follow the published minimum specs, we can expect to manage about 50 cameras on a server that is running the directory role and the archiver role. That number doubles to about 100 cameras if we follow the recommended specs, and increases again to about 300 cameras by following the high-performance specs. If, however, we dedicate a server to being only an archiver, minimum specs would get us 75 cameras, recommended specs 300, and high-performance specs would allow us to set up a server managing from 500 to 1,000 cameras. Now please keep in mind that there are so many variables that this can affect these numbers. These are just estimates to give you a rough idea. Whenever designing a system with more than 50 cameras or doors, we encourage you to reach out to our sales engineering team. They are engineers who support our sales managers. Genetec sales engineers specialize in designing new systems. They can sit down with you to discuss what you need in your project, and they will design the system for you. How many servers will you need? What kind of workstations should you use? How much storage to plan? Which software server roles will be needed? Etc. To install the server software, use a file browser to navigate to the location of the installation files and run the file setup.exe as a Windows administrator. So at this point, we've covered the theory, we've covered the prerequisites. I'm going to leave the PowerPoint slideshow and jump right into the installation itself. What I'll do is I'll install both server software and client software on one of my VMs. So I've already downloaded the full 3.8 gig installation package. I've unzipped it, and I'll just run the setup.exe file. And the first thing it asks me is the language to be used for the setup installer. Now this is not the language of the software being installed, but just for the install wizard. After accepting the software license agreement, we're then presented with the option to install client software, server software, or both. The Omnicast compatibility packs down below are used for integrations with very old versions of Genetec software. We won't need those. And now we can select the language for the software itself. There are 24 languages supported in this version. When installing a server, we need to choose whether it'll be a main server running the directory role or what we call an expansion server, a Genetec server that will connect to an existing system. The Help Improve Genetec Products page does two things. First, if you allow it, the software will send anonymous usage statistics back to Genetec. No camera images, badge numbers, or plate reads are sent to Genetec, only anonymous statistics describing which features in the software are being used. This is so that Genetec can devote more R&D and development resources to the stuff that people are actually using and less to the features that are not as popular. So that's one. The second thing that this page does is it allows you to monitor system health statistics from a secure web portal. Again, it's not camera images, badge numbers, or plate reads, but rather system health statistics like any cameras or door controllers offline, any server's storage full, has everything connected successfully to its respective database, are packets being lost on the network. These are called health events, and they can be monitored from a secure web portal online if you allow it. Then, because I chose server installation, we're asked about a database server. Genetec servers require connection to an SQL database server. You can either select your own database server or ask the installer to install SQL Server. It will install SQL Express 2019. Because Genetec Server software installs a Windows service known as the Genetec Server Service, we ask if that service should run with the local default local system account, or if you want some other Windows user account to be used for the server service. Then we're prompted to set a password specifically for the server admin application. This is not for the actual Security Center day-to-day operations, but rather a special utility that's found only on Genetec servers. In today's example, you'll see the server admin application as that's where we apply the system's license. The next dialog allows the installer to modify your local Windows firewall rules. If you don't allow the installer to do it, you'll have to modify the Windows firewall manually. Security settings. There are 4 specific security settings included on this page. By default, the installer will want to apply our recommended settings, but you can choose custom if you want to control each of these settings manually. What do they do? Here are the 4 security settings in question. Directory certificate. Anything that connects to the directory, like a client application or an expansion server, must use secure, encrypted communications. The first step in establishing this secure communication involves the exchange of security certificates. By default, Genetec servers will use their own self-signed security certificates, and by default, whenever another computer is presented with a self-signed certificate, its connecting application should pause and ask the user if we want to trust the certificate and connect. Think of the browser warning you might see when connecting to a web server using its own self-signed certificate. The browser asks you if you trust the server and if you want to continue. Well, that's what this first setting does. It allows us to turn off the security prompt when receiving a self-signed certificate. Don't ask the user what to do, just trust the server and connect. Secondly, camera authentication. When an archiver server connects to a camera, it must authenticate with the camera to establish the connection. Most cameras on the market today support 2 kinds of authentication: basic authentication and digest authentication. Digest authentication uses encrypted communications, whereas basic authentication does not. This setting allows us to turn off basic authentication and force all server-to-camera authentication to be done using digest or encrypted authentication. Thirdly, auto-update. Updating the software is important to access new features, but updates also include bug fixes and security patches. In the context of security, keeping the software always up to date means that all the latest security patches will be applied. This setting allows us to turn on or off the auto-update service. Fourth and last, update service in the config tool. The update service is really supplementary to the core software, and it has its own user interface, but this setting allows the update service to be seen and configured in the config tool application instead of needing to access its own interface. Once we've set our security settings or chosen to accept the recommended settings, we can click Install, and the installation begins. Keep in mind that in this particular installation, SQL Server will be installed, Security Center Server will be installed, and our config tool and security desk applications will be installed. That's a lot. It actually takes 15 to 20 minutes for all of those components to be installed, so I'm going to fast forward our video so that we can get to the end of the installation and apply the server's license. At the end of the installation, a dialog box will pop open confirming that the installation is complete. Notice this option is selected by default, Launch Server Admin. The server admin is the application we'll use to apply the server license. It's why we had to set a password during the installation. The password we established a few minutes ago is what we'll use to log in to the server admin. We'll also need a Security Center server license ready to be applied. Only main servers require licenses. If I set up a big 5-server system, it's only the main server or the server running the directory role that needs the license. The other 4 expansion servers don't. Whether you have a commercial production license or a free demo license, every time Genetec generates a server license, an email is sent to the person requesting the license. That email will contain the license's system ID and password. These 2 values are required to activate the license on the server. And this is what that email looks like. It contains links to download the software itself, download the installation guide, release notes. But look at this, there's 2 file attachments. One of them contains my system's system ID and password, and the other attachment contains instructions on how to apply and activate the license. So let's open this one with the system ID and password. There's my system ID, and there's the password. This is what I'll need to activate the license on my new server. I'll just keep this aside for the moment. Back on my newly installed server, I'll log into the server admin application using the password that I set during the software installation. And once I'm connected, I find 3 blinking status lights at the top of the home page: green, yellow, and red. A healthy server should show 3 solid green lights here. So our server is not in good shape. But it's not a technical problem, it's just that the license hasn't been applied yet. Now when it comes to licensing, keep in mind that a license is required only on the main server. Licenses are specific to a given server and cannot be transferred or moved from one server to another. And licensing must be done after the server software has been installed. It cannot be installed in advance. Here's a quick overview of how the Security Center licenses work. The server software runs an algorithm that notes the server's MAC addresses, Windows security identifiers, how much RAM is installed, what kind of CPU is installed, how many hard drives are present, and a number of other properties of the server. These values are churned through an algorithm generating a unique value known as the validation key. Every server will generate its own unique validation key. We then connect to the Genetec licensing server and say, I want to download my server license, please. The licensing server will reply, yes, of course, but please give me your validation key first. I upload my validation key and the licensing server creates a new license for me in accordance with my unique validation key. I then download the license key and apply it on my server. This means that the license file that I download will not work on any other server. If you ever need to replace hardware components on your server or reinstall Windows, you can contact tech support and they will perform a reset of your license so that you can use a new or different validation key. Back to our newly installed server. So under the server admin's license section, I'll click modify. And if the server has an internet connection, I can use what's called the web activation to simply paste the system ID and password that I received previously by email and just put them in there. So I'm just going to go and copy and paste my system ID, and also from the licensing email, the password, and click Activate. The server admin is now uploading my server's validation key, downloading the corresponding licensing key, applying it to the server, and restarting the directory. We can see that 2 out of my 3 status lights are now green, and the directory just needs to finish restarting. Once that's all done, there we go. 3 solid green status lights. Our server is ready. So I'll close the server admin application, and I want to test a client connection. I installed both server software and client applications on this VM. So as a little test, let's see if the Security Desk application can log on to this new server. I open the Security Desk application, and to connect and log in, all of our applications require 3 pieces of information. Where's the server you want to connect to? What is your username? And what is your password? For the first field, directory, I can use either the server's host name or its IP address. I'll use host name in this case. In every new Security Center system, there exists only one user by default. Username, admin. Password, there is none by default. And there we go. That's it. All done. Server installation verified. I've successfully logged on to my new Security Center server using the Security Desk client application. So this concludes our software installation mini training. Thank you for attending.